After developing the framework, we realized that we needed to really create a database of the materials that building materials are made of in order to properly evaluate many of these categories we want to look at. Therefore, we created the Chemical and Material Library. Currently, there's just under 10,000 chemicals and materials in this library. And the basic premise is this is a listing of chemicals, primarily in polymers, some bio-based materials, and we scan about 20 to 26, it looks like, 26 currently. We scan those 26 chemical hazard lists and take a look at the hazards that are associated with the chemicals that make up the majority of building materials out there in the market. We then categorize the warnings into the level of attention that they warrant. Black being the worst, green meaning that the material has been studied, but that has not been found to cause a particular listed impact, and it would list what that impact was. We look at two kinds of hazards. We look at direct health hazards, and these are hazards that are directly linked to the material itself. It appears by CAS number on one of these chemical lists, hazard lists that we scan. And then life cycle health hazards. This is really starting to look at the chemicals that make the chemicals. Especially when you start to get to things like resin binders and polymers, you're looking at the creation of blending several chemicals. So we want to get a sense of what that polymer or binder is made of and really dig down into the chemicals that go into that. So you have a much better idea if something may have formaldehyde as a root ingredient, even though it has a totally different name when you actually get to what the polymer is called. It just gives you hopefully a much better sense of what you're dealing with. So let's take a look at how this works. You can either type the, if you know the actual name of the chemical, you could go ahead and say for formaldehyde. And you see it auto-completes if you know the name. If you know the CAS number, if you're working from an MSDS, for instance, if you know the CAS number, you can go ahead and start typing the CAS number. It'll find it. You can go ahead and choose it. And then we'll take a look at what we know about this particular material. Basically, at the top of the screen, you have what we call our quick screen. This filters all the direct hazard warnings and puts them into an easy-to-use form to give you quickly in these 10 major areas what we know if there's a warning there. As you can see, there are known warnings here for carcinogen, other chronic, acute, and action list. Action list is the EPA's Chemicals of Concern action list. Here you can actually see the direct warnings themselves. So you can actually see the wording, what the actual list was, who created the list. Here's what we're talking about, looking at life cycle chemicals. As you can see, this breaks down the feedstock that is used to produce formaldehyde and the warnings associated with that feedstock. You can go ahead and click through any of these to get their full profile. Another thing we do is we look at compound groups that this chemical is part of. The reason we do that is in many of these lists, a compound may be listed, and that may encompass 50 to 100 chemicals. And we want to make sure that those 50 to 100 chemicals are tagged with that warning. So we make sure to look at any compound groups that a chemical may be part of, and then look for those compound groups on the full listing of the hazard lists. Let's take another example. You can also use either synonyms or, in some case, short names. We could say, let's say BPA is one that people know about. So let's go ahead and click BPA. Again, we've got our quick screen here. Also lists synonyms that it might also be listed under. If you had searched for any of those, this same result would come back. Again, you can do the quick screen, take a quick look at what we know, and if you want, you can then dig in more directly into the actual lists themselves and what the hazards are. And again, the life cycle. What chemicals actually go into making this material? Compound groups. You can go ahead and click through a compound group and find out the chemicals that are reflected in that compound group and any hazards directly warning to that compound group. So here's a case where BPA was not listed as a specific chemical, but was listed as a compound group in the EPA Chemicals of Concern Action Plan. Going back just quickly here to the lists, as you find things on lists, we can go ahead and take the AOEC asthenogens list, for instance. We give you a little detail description on what this list is, when it was published. It also gives you the actual independent warning flags that you would find in this list. Here's a sample of that green flag I talked about, where a flag might say that there's no proof yet for a specific health effect on a list. If you get into the lists, if you want to go ahead and look, you can click on any of these lists. And it's going to give you a description of that actual warning code, the hazard type, the warning level, and then a list of all the chemicals that meet that, or I should say have been flagged by that. All of this goes to formulate the basis of our building product library. So let's take a look at that.